Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us for this webinar featuring Dr. Ron Cox and the Iowa Workforce Skirmishes. I'm John Hall, President and CEO of the Marshalltown Area Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of our organization and our members, thank you guys for joining us. Do want to give a quick shout out to our webinar sponsors this year, which is Lennox, M. Gervich & Sons, and Pinnacle Bank. Thank you guys for sponsoring our webinar series throughout the year. I do want to now introduce our speaker, Dr. Ron Cox of the Center for Industrial Research and Service at Iowa State. They serve a statewide organization serving business and industry, and have put together a presentation on what Dr. Cox calls the workforce skirmishes, looking at workforce from 1950 until today. And I think it's a really incredibly insightful, I've seen the presentation a couple of times, incredibly insightful conversation around workforce and the workforce challenges we're facing today, and hopefully some optimism on the back end of it. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cox to present, but if there are questions throughout the presentation, we will save those up and ask them at the end, but all attendees should be able to chat those in. There's a chat function, should be on the right-hand side of your screen, where you can send in questions, and we will get those asked at the end as time allows. So I'll turn it over to Ron to present.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Great to have you here. This presentation is about 30 minutes, and then I think we'll have 30 minutes. We can use any amount of that for questions. What led to this? 4 years ago, we kind of saw what's about to happen, and we submitted a proposal focused on a piece of this. COVID slowed us down, but we kind of came out this summer. I scheduled about 25 talks, and I thought I'd give the 25 and we'd be done. I have given or have planned 100, and I'm not trying to give this anymore, but requests keep coming in. So if you've seen some of this before, I've updated the data, and you'll see the most recent data that I've been able to get. So here, let's get into the story. I call it the Iowa Workforce Skirmishes because I contend that this is just the start, and that we're actually going to be in an all-out war for talent, and we've just seen the beginning of it. And I call it a bedtime story because there is a villain, and I would never put you to bed and scare the living daylights out of you if I thought we couldn't defeat the villain. So let's get going. If you're not familiar with CIRRUS, we work with about 1,700 Iowa companies each year. Our goal is to help companies thrive so that the communities where they are housed are healthy communities. Why I wrote this story, or I'm dedicating it to my first mentor. I'm an aerospace engineer. When I went to work in the aerospace industry, I thought, I learned how to design a wing. I knew how to do it. You open up 100 books, they're all the same. And my mentor said, you need to look at that wing from 90 degrees because you're going to see something that's not in a textbook. And I always thought it was a good explanation when you're dealing with a very tough problem. Sometimes you need to back up and look at things differently. And I'm going to ask you to turn 90 degrees today. Table of contents, workforce past, present. I'm going to really knock you down with the left cross. We're going to look at workforce differently and see if you're ready to turn. The workforce yet to come, and the best line that was never said in a movie, Apollo 13, failure is not an option. So what really got me going on this? I found a survey we did of Iowa industry at the height of the Vietnam War. Industry said the #1 problem in Iowa is lack of workforce. And the #1 thing we need to do to solve it is more apprenticeship programs. And we all know the definition of insanity. Here it is 50 years later, and we still have workforce problems. Okay, introduction. It was the best of times, or so I thought this summer, before we heard of Omicron, people getting their shots, and we are hoping COVID is behind us. Well, it's also a great time if you're in business in terms of markets. This is the PMI, so it's a national survey of businesses. Anything above 50, business is growing. Anything below 1950, things are shrinking, and you can kind of see the recessions in there. Well, coming out of COVID, you all went home, you didn't go on vacation, you didn't go to restaurants, you saved your money, and now you're blowing it. And companies and supply chains and workforce can't keep up with it. And it was the worst of times. Every picture there is a help wanted sign. We're hiring, apply within, scattered across the entire state. Pictures I've taken as I've been out giving this talk. Prologue. Set it up some more. In 1950, Iowa, Minnesota, and Florida had identical populations, 2.5 million people. And look at today. Florida is 7 times our size, Minnesota about double. Let's look at these two cases. What's happened? Okay, case 1. How did Florida go from the land of mosquitoes to the land of mice? Well, technology. The window air conditioner became widely available and economical, and you were able to actually stand to live in the South in those kind of temperatures and humidity. But they didn't stop there. They created a tourism industry, a space industry, international trade, a retirement industry. That's huge. And that state has been growing 10% every decade, decade after decade after decade. Well, it's not the economy, it's the weather, stupid. That's why people aren't moving to Iowa. Well, this is a shot of Minnesota. They make our weather conditions look meek at times, but they've figured out how to grow. I call it the continuous improvement model of population growth. They've embraced immigration. They have technology in Rochester. They've got tourism up north, the Twin Cities, obviously. They've got a lot of little things going on, and it's added up. They passed us in 1920 in terms of population. Okay, chapter 1. You're not getting better, you're getting worse because your competition's getting better. Let's look at Minneapolis and Des Moines. I took Des Moines Metro today, the counties that make up the Des Moines Metro, and I went back to 1900. In 1900, 1 out of 12 Iowans lived in the Des Moines Metro. We are at roughly 1 out of 4 Iowans, close to it, will be living in Des Moines soon. If you take Des Moines out of Iowa and you take the Twin Cities out of Minnesota, you see how the rest of the state has done. And if you look at 1970 to today, Iowa outside of the Des Moines Metro is basically unchanged in population. Some part of Iowa grew, some other part shrunk. But Minnesota outside of the Twin Cities has figured out how to keep growing. Our growth is lumpy though. So since 1950 to today, the US, the red bar on the left, has roughly doubled in size, a little more than doubled in size. Iowa's only grown about 20%, and it's lumpy growth. If you're lucky enough to live in Des Moines, Ames, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, or Davenport, you're growing it near the US average. All other metros are growing about at the Iowa average, and we've got about 70 or 80 rural counties that have been shrinking. In the last 50 years, Iowa is the 5th slowest growing state. Every state around us has figured out how to grow faster. And this is important because here's a rough equation for you. Roughly half of Americans work. Half are half kids, retired, and of working age not working, and the other half work. So we've got about 300 million people in the United States, 150 million workers, about 3 million in Iowa, about 1.5 million workers. So if your population isn't growing, your workforce isn't growing, and that's the villain. There is someone trying to keep your companies from growing, the workforce villain. So chapter 2, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Let's look at some more numbers. Before COVID, 70% of Iowa's counties had fewer than 300 people on unemployment. Every business in those 70 counties were searching through that pile of 300 people, trying to get them to work for them. We have the 4th lowest unemployment in the United States, Iowa, over the last 3 decades. Unemployment has not been an issue. Blue is the US average, green is Iowa. Things shot up during COVID, they're coming back down. We're about 1% above unemployment before COVID. The country has gotten back to roughly where they were before COVID, but that was worse than Iowa. This is employment, people working, and I'm comparing Iowa with the United States. So coming out of 2001 recession, we grew about at the US average rate of growth. We didn't lose as many jobs in the 2008 recessions because a lot of jobs in recessions that are lost are in the tourism industry, and we don't have a lot of tourism in Iowa. But coming out of the 2008 recession, the US took off, Iowa a little slower. COVID hit, and now we're coming back. But in Iowa, we've lost almost a decade of job growth that we need to figure out how to recover. But that doesn't concern me the most, this does. And that is around 2015-16, our growth rate in jobs broke over and significantly growing, and Iowa was growing jobs at a much slower rate than the US. And if you look at how we're coming out of this recession, it looks like in a couple of months, the US could be back to pre-COVID levels of jobs. But Iowa, we're probably going to be into 2023 for certain if we're able to pull these people back and get back. Even if we get back to that level, it has been going at a slow growth rate. So if you're trying to grow your company rapidly, we're in a state where that might be difficult to do. This is labor force participation rate. Of the percent of people that could be working, what percent are? Roughly 2 out of 3 in America. Over the last 3 decades, we've had the 5th best labor force participation rate in the United States. So red is the US, blue is Iowa. For every state above that red line, you've got states like West Virginia and Mississippi and Kentucky below it. So I'm here to tell you, Iowans want to work. We have a lot of Iowans working, and that's part of our problem. And I'll get to that in a second. So I subtract the US from Iowa. So this is how much better Iowa is. We are, before COVID, we had 7% more of the population working age working than the US average. We grew it substantially over the 4 decades before. Now it's dropped during COVID as it did across the country. So how did we get to this high labor force participation rate? Well, we had a couple patches. Patch 1, we had a farm crisis and a lot of farmers lost their farms, went into the workforce, they took a second job, the spouse entered the workforce, and that gave a shot to businesses and allowed them to grow in Iowa because of these newfound workers at the expense of the farm economy. Another thing happened. Across the United States and in Iowa, women entered the workforce in record numbers. So these were new people that used to not work that allowed companies to continue to grow. We had another patch here. We've got a lot of manufacturing in Iowa. Well, we shed about 30,000 net manufacturing jobs, largely to China. And those people didn't leave the workforce. They went to work for construction companies, service companies, etc. So they let other companies continue to grow. But we have plateaued. So chapter 3, the left cross. This is where I depress you as much as I can. And I'm here to tell you 100 years of data suggests that unless something really, really big happens, and by big, I mean global warming, east and west coast floods, and Iowa is the highest place left and everybody moves here, there's not going to be any more people. They're not coming to save the day. We've had this problem for 100 years, slow population growth, and we've got to figure this out. And we've run out of patches unless we're going to injure another Iowa industry so that we can take their workers and help a different Iowa industry. So in a nutshell, huge demand for products and services. Our population workforce is fairly fast, flat, slow growing. Our labor force participation is high. We've been a great state. We've pulled them into the workforce. There's just not that many people left. And these patches are likely gone. Okay, so now we've got to solve this problem. A 90-degree change in how we look at workforce. My argument is there's no new people, but there will be more employees for some of you. And we know this because we've seen companies for the last 10 years find people, and we know what they're doing. Here's what they're not doing. They're not relying on just this pool, the unemployed. This is everybody from 0 to 100 years old in Iowa. Roughly half the 16 to 20-year-olds are working, roughly 3/4 of the 20 to 65, and about 1/3 of the 65 to 75-year-olds work. And everybody's chasing the red bar, the unemployed. And we're saying you need to look here. There's a lot more people in these pockets. There's still roughly 25% of the population not employed that could possibly be employed. We have employed people, but they're employed elsewhere, not in your county, or they work for you and you keep turning them over. Retention. We are one of the bottom quartile of states in retention for lots of reasons. And every time you lose somebody, you have to hire somebody back to break even, and then you have to hire somebody new to grow. This also includes part-time people that could potentially be working full-time if you could solve the problem that's keeping them away from full-time work. 3 and 4, process improvements and automations. Get more out of the people you have, supplement them with machines and computers. And 5, the workforce of the future. So there's a really tough problem, right? People are all interconnected at work, at home. It's what we call in mathematics a nonlinear system of equations. Tough equation to solve, right? That's why we're having these workforce problems. It's a tough problem to solve, but we know how to solve these problems. An airplane is a nonlinear system of equations. And we know how to design the most complex fighters in the world. What can we learn from how we're so great at that to solve Iowa's workforce problem? Well, here's the basic concept. You can't design the fighter all at once. You break it into hundreds of pieces. The nose, the tail, the wing, etc. And we do that with workforce. We have found 29 sets of data that describe Iowans and different kinds of Iowans and what fraction of them work and what fraction don't work. So what do we do with the airplane? Well, on the airplane, we make one piece, we study one piece at a time. We make the wing bigger, we throw it into a wind tunnel and say, did the airplane get better or worse and how much? We put the wing back, do the same to the tail, repeat it for all the components to understand what's there, what's driving the design. Well, we can do that with people too, and people that work. Here's an example. If everybody on this webinar came together in a room and we asked all the people the same height to stand together in the middle, shorter people to the left, taller people to the right, you'd get this distribution that looks like this. And we all know what it is. It's a bell curve, a normal distribution. But I'm going to ask you to turn 90 degrees. And I want you to get out of your groups of similar sized people and instead stand side by side from shortest to tallest. So I didn't blow up the room by any means. I just told you to get out of your groups. I'm going to look at you differently. And you get this curve. And it shows you that real tall people, the tallest person is at the far right, 1. Shortest person is the far left. They're ranked 0. Now, where are we going with this data? Well, I'll tell you, we're going disco dancing. So here's how it works. Bear with me. So John Travolta, he's on the disco floor and he wants to be taller. He's at the 40th percentile and he wants to be the 60th percentile, a little taller. Well, we know the distribution of the height of people in the United States. So we know the math. A 1.5-inch boot heel moves him up 20% in the rankings. Now, we don't care about your height. We care about whether you're working or not. So how do we turn this concept into where are the people? Well, this is what we do. We compare your county with 1,100 counties in the Midwest. We don't compare you with counties in Texas and Florida because it's warm right now, today. And we're comparing you with counties that look like you. And what do we get? We get curves that just the same look like John Travolta on the height curve. This is the percent of 65 to 74-year-olds at work. In the US, roughly 1 out of 4 people that age work. In Iowa, we're better. We're close to 30% of 65 to 74-year-olds work. But we've got to ask ourselves, why is this county in Michigan only 1 out of 8 people that age are working? Yet this county in Kansas, half of them, 4 out of every 8 are working today. What are these counties doing on the right to get more people to work? Well, it turns out we don't have to actually go to Kansas and find out, because the best Iowa county is one of the best in central US, and one of the worst Iowa counties at getting 65 to 74-year-olds to work is one of the worst in the Midwest. So we have 29 curves like this, county by county. How are you doing in terms of getting different kinds of people to work? Now, will we get 100% of 65 to 74-year-olds to work? Not a chance. But just like John Travolta, we weren't trying to get John Travolta 7.5 feet tall by having a 2-foot boot heel. We moved him up 20%. So the question is, if Marshalltown can move up 20% and move, it turns out that's only 4% more 65 to 74-year-olds. And we know how many 65 to 74-year-olds work in your county. So we can turn that into a number. Is it 50 or 500 or 5,000? And then you can decide, is it worth pursuing people that look like that? So on an airplane, we've tested the wing and the tail and everything, and we shoot off in a direction, changing everything. Now that we know how the individual pieces improve the aircraft. Well, we can do it with people too. We call it the workforce vector. If you go in that direction, people are going to look like this, and there's not many of them. And if you go in that direction, you're going to find a lot more people, and these are their characteristics. Okay, chapter 5. Are you ready to turn 90 degrees and look at workforce differently? Well, I like this quote because the story changes based on your choice. And here are your choices. Path 1 says, COVID created our workforce problems in Iowa. COVID's going to go away. Therefore, our workforce problems are going to go away. And if you believe that, I would argue you've not been trying to grow aggressively for the last 20 years, because if you were, you would have been running into these workforce problems before. We've had these problems for some time. COVID sped up what was inevitable. Path 2 says you're not willing to not grow. You're going to figure it out. You're the hero. You are going to slay the villain. The CEO of the company, not the head of HR, is the superhero. Some superheroes go it alone. Some have a sidekick. If you need a sidekick, feel free to call Iowa State. Cirrus is here to help. We have a number of federal programs, labs on campus, and partnerships, and we are helping companies strategically design their workforce of the future plan. Okay, chapter 6. Here's how it works. Workforce yet to come. Dreamers and planners. Planners make their dreams come true. We have a 4-step process. Step 1, what have you tried? What's worked? What hasn't with these different 29 kinds of people? Step 2, we show you the workforce vector. It's messy, it's math, it has lots of problems, but we know where your county is good, where your county is bad, and you have to decide. A we're hiring sign says you're trying to do all 29. Workforce strategy, this approach is choose where the most people are, where you think your company culture can win at the game, and pursue that element. Step 3, we have 29 of these columns, and each kind of person has different problems that's keeping them out of the workforce. Once you decide what you're aiming for, then the research will show these are the root causes that you're going to have to make sure you're addressing, so you win that kind of person. Last step, of course, you got to solve your problems. What are those root issues? Change them and market that you're open for business to this kind of employee. Okay, chapter 7. Let's wrap this up. Failure's not an option. That's not what was said. Apollo 13 had problems near the moon. They had to bring them home. What the flight director, Gene Kranz, said is, I've never lost a man in space, and I'm not starting on my watch. You got to believe it. The whole team has to believe it. We've got to figure out how to get them home. So the question for Marshall County is, do you believe it? Do you believe you can continue to grow your businesses despite our population problems? And our argument is a community or a company can grow in Iowa if leadership is not going to keep trying to solve the problem the way we've been doing it since 1970 at the height of the Vietnam War. And you've got only three options. Virtual people, get more out of the people you have, supplement them with machines and computers and data analytics. And if you need a person, you've got three options. You have to solve a problem that's keeping them out of the workforce and attract them to your company. You got to stop the churn and retain your employees, reduce your retention rate, improve your retention rate, and you've got to steal from the competition. It's the American way. You've got to outperform, out culture, out want to be the company people want to work for, and they'll leave the companies that can't meet your quality. And then you've got to develop the workforce of the future. So close kind of with this. This is an ad of a manufacturer in Minnesota that has branch plants in Iowa. Their goal last year was to hire 1,500 new people. Look at this ad. Do you know how to do the job? No, we don't care. We'll train you. Do you speak English? You have to. No, no problem. We'll train you. Do you have holidays other than Christmas and Easter off? No problem. You get them off. Does your religion require you to pray in the middle of the workday? Kind of inconvenient, but we'll put prayer rooms in. Does your religion require you to wash your hands, face, and feet before praying? Well, we've got sinks for two. How about we put foot washing stations in? This is a company that saw a potential labor pool, saw what was needed to win the war, and then changed their company. And then last step, as I said, number 4, market that you're open for business for this kind of employee. And they're winning with this strategy. So, are you ready to look at workforce different? All the easy people have been hired. It's now going to be a lot tougher. But I'm convinced you can win at this game because we see companies changing rapidly to this new norm that we find ourselves in. That's my story, and we'll open it up for Q&A, I guess.
Well, thanks, Ron. I really appreciate you taking time to present here. I guess I'll kick it off, and then we'll see if anybody has any questions that they want to put in the chat. I did see that Sarah had put something into the chat to show everybody where that's at, and hopefully those questions can get sent in if there are any. So you talked about kind of the 4 steps to engaging in this. How do people get started in step 1? You know, the engaging in this conversation. Is this a community engagement or is it business by business? You know, where should people start? Where should we start?
Yeah, good question. The way I look at it this way, a state could take this on, a community or a company. The absolute slowest way to do it is statewide, right? It could take decades and decades and decades. The fastest is company specific. We've seen companies in 1 hour after seeing this presentation change their strategies and immediately start finding people. Communities takes longer. So it really depends on your community and how aligned everybody is. So what we do with communities is try to bring together the 10 or 20 largest companies, right? The hospital, the manufacturers, the school system, because they're driving so much of this. So the question on the community side would be, is are you that aligned? Can you rapidly get people aligned? For a company, thing we do is we sit down, typically it's a couple of hour strategy sessions, getting the leadership team, sometimes the board of directors, seeing the presentation, answering all the questions, and then going through kind of that step of what's worked, what hasn't, what's your culture, what's possible, where do you think you can win?
And so if there are businesses interested in engaging with that, who would they reach out to at Cirrus? Would it be directly to you, or are there others that they should be connecting with?
Yeah, we started this thinking there'd be a little demand, and we've basically been called by architecture firms, insurance companies, manufacturers, constructions, YMCA, daycares. Everybody's been calling us, which is fine. You can reach out directly to me, but we're building the team now. Brenda Martin, and we can get the contact information, who is taking over this since I'm the Cirrus director, but we're adding a few people now and building this team out now. But it would, in the next 3 to 6 months, it's probably myself and Brenda Martin leading the discussions.
Very good. And so you've been giving this presentation then for, you said really the last year or since the summer. Have you started to see results in businesses here within the state of Iowa as a result of the conversation, both the webinar and then that further stepped conversation?
Yeah, we basically started in August, and we've had close to 2,200 people come to the presentation so far. So it's the companies that saw it and they were able to move very rapidly saw results very rapidly. One company said they found 30 people within a couple of weeks. And it was basically that company changed their policies. Their policy was we only hire full time, and they saw kind of the problems and decided and opened the door to part time and they immediately got a number of people that they said they wouldn't have gotten if they hadn't thought about it. Lots of other anecdotal information. Companies hiring remote workers, companies doing novel different things. I would say probably the biggest thing people have been focused on is retention. A lot of companies knew they had these problems. They didn't realize kind of how widespread it was, that they weren't alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, very good. Well, I'm not seeing any questions come through. I'm hoping it's not an issue with our system, but hopefully you answered everybody's questions and gave folks something to think about. If there are questions afterwards, please send them to staff at our organization, and we'd be happy to get those to Dr. Cox or anybody on his team, as well as connect you with him or Brenda to start any conversations. So thank you, Ron, for being here.
Let me jump in. I've gotten anywhere from 5 minutes to 1 hour of questions after this presentation. So if no one's asking questions, either there's technical issues or people are doing email instead of listening. These are the common questions I get. Is there anything? The first thing I would say is this is a US problem. We have fertility and immigration issues in the US. Fertility rates have been dropping around the world. So our population in the US is earmarked to peak in about a decade. And immigration has been declining. So together, these are creating problems across the US. COVID did send some people home, but these issues were happening without COVID. And Iowa, because we're a slow growth state, it's really hit hard here. Anything spark any ideas or questions?
Well, I guess I have another one. You know, I've worked with Cirrus in the past, and I'm sure some of our manufacturers have. But can you talk about the increase in kind of the automation side of things? I know that you guys spend a lot of time helping companies with that, the robotics, the cobots, and how that's really moving companies forward. I think about a lot of our smaller manufacturers that may have thought that some of this stuff may have been inaccessible early on when automation was really coming to starts, but now with where we're at and kind of that changing workforce, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, and this presentation I came out mainly Rotary talks and things like this. So this, what I've got here is high level. But the robotics one, my argument would be the machines aren't coming, they're here. It's happening everywhere. Even the French fry providers are looking at robotic French fries, because if you think you're having problems, just imagine that you cannot go buy a McDonald's or anything that isn't hiring. They're hiring constantly. So the state does have a program in robotics where they're funding, I think, companies up to roughly 250. Cirrus, for companies under 75, the legislation says you have to have a Industry 4.0 assessment. We have been inundated. We've had to add staff. We've had requests for over 150 of these robotics and Industry 4.0 assessments. We've been in every part of the state. We have blanketed the state. We continue to get requests to come in and do an assessment of where is the low-hanging fruit of how we can invest. Companies are investing in technology, robotics, automation in all ways because workforce is such an issue.
And for those that are on our webinar, you know, our primary utility provider for most of our industries is Alliant Energy, and I do know that there is a lab at the Iowa State University Research Park on automation that is a partnership between Alliant and Cirrus. And so I think for those that feel like, you know, there's no room for automation where they're at, or haven't even broached the conversation, that can be a really easy way to kind of introduce yourself to some automation conversations before trying to get on Cirrus's list and actually do an on-site assessment.
Yeah, so we're holding monthly tours. It's meant to give you a high level, but the goal of the lab is hands-on, to get in and use sensors, scanning, robotics, any kind of technology to help your company. So funded in part by the Iowa Economic Development Authority and Alliant Energy and Iowa State University. We've had lots of people in.
Very good. Well, I'll ask one more and then we'll wrap things up. So I can't not mention immigration. You know, obviously Marshalltown being roughly 40% non-white, one of the most non-white communities in the state of Iowa. Immigration has been our really our saving grace for population levels maintaining and our workforce continuing to grow. Can you talk a little bit about the immigration of it all?
Yeah, so I get lots of questions on immigration, and I would say I've received more questions about immigration in the last 6 months than in the 20 years before. So it's on everybody's mind. These are kind of the definitions. You have to really worry. Are you looking at migrant workers that are coming and going? Are you really looking about bringing people here as permanent resident aliens? All these curves, the John Travolta height curve, they all look the same. I throw some down the left, but one does not look the same. It's immigration. And it's because so many counties in the Midwest aren't doing it. So basically, you know, everybody's far below 1%. You've got these 30 or 40, 50 counties in the Midwest that have figured it out. I'm guessing your county is one of these to the far right, and we've got the data I can show you. So the potential that our mathematics predicts for you is low because we're comparing you with everybody else and they're just not good at it. Here is the chart I mentioned on immigration. So the gray line, if we have zero immigration in the US, the population in the United States peaks about 2035, which means and that's the population. That includes people that are retiring. We've got all these baby boomers that are heading towards and in retirement. So the number of workers are likely to be far less. Immigration curves bounce up because not only is the immigrant a new person, but they have more children per immigrant. These curves were predicted based on kind of immigration between 2010 and 2015. These curves are being rewritten now and downsized because immigration started to decrease in the last 5 years. So it's not as rosy. So we've got a population problem in the US because birth rates are now down to 1.7 per female. You need 2.1 births per female in the United States to keep our population flat. And we started down coming out of the 2008 recession, and the country overall has made up for these low birth rates with immigration. So now with immigration going down, it's part of the reason we're having these problems. So the counties, some of them that have been growing or even been able to keep their populations flat, typically immigration has been part of the solution.
That makes sense. So I did get notice from Sarah that there are a few questions. I don't seem to have the questions tab, so I apologize. I was not able to see those coming in, but Sarah does have the questions, and so she's going to jump in here by audio to read through those.
Okay. So the first question we have is, what are some of the best alternatives, incentives, or benefits you have heard of or known of being used?
So probably the biggest thing is people have started to see that one size benefit package does not fit all. Probably the thing we've been hearing a lot about beyond raising pay is more flexibility. Companies are looking at how they do things and talking to their employees more about how do you, they might even have not as efficient processes so that they can get people in and out. People are looking at, not mandating meetings certain times of the day, so that if there are issues at home and people need to get to, that you can be remote work at home. So I think the biggest thing is just figure out from your employees what they want and don't try a one size fits all benefit package, especially for recruiting new employees with a different set of issues maybe than what your current employees have.
And this is a similar question as you just referred to remote working. Do you see remote working options as a benefit to Iowa, or do you feel like it will cause more folks to move out of state?
So this is the standard question I get, right? People can live in safe Iowa, so people move here. I don't think anybody's moving here. Here's the real issue. I can live in how some people perceive Iowa on the left and work remotely to Silicon Valley, or I can live where my son lives on the right and work remotely. People are going to live where they want to live, and what COVID has taught us all is you can work anywhere. Here's the basic problem. So US citizens are voting with their feet where they want to live. And in 1920-ish, people passed with their feet voting for urban US versus rural US. And Iowa has a lot of rural US in it. So that peaked around 1990. So you're going to see more and more people in cities, fewer people in rural areas. So what do I see? I see and I hear two things. More people in Iowa, especially in rural areas, are hiring remote workers, more so than I've ever heard in my 25 years of this. I've also seen the scary thing, more people working for somebody out of state, living where they currently live. So I actually believe we're going to have more competition for our existing Iowa workforce because people are saying, I don't want to work for company X local. Let me take a remote job working for some company in Texas. I do know of a case that was told by a company. They offered something over $200,000 to a software engineer in Des Moines. And the person took the job and worked for 3 days and quit and took a job in California remotely for over $400,000 a year. So that's my biggest concern. So yes, we know companies are hiring more remote workers in Iowa. My fear is we might start having even more competition for our employees.
Great. It looks like there's one more question. If anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the questions or the chat tab. Otherwise, after this one, we'll probably wrap it up. Is there evidence that paying people more gets more employers higher quality of employees? Do the best employees find those positions?
So I'm no expert on pay, so I'm not going to tell you this. It's more just Econ 101, right? Somebody is the most profitable company in your community and somebody is the least profitable. And as wages go up, somebody's going to be squeezed out. What do people want? It changes by generation. Millennials will tell you they want more of something than a boomer would want. More and more people entering the workforce are looking for companies that are believe in sustainability, are doing the right things in the community, investing in the community, and pay is always high, but sometimes it's not number one for those kinds of individuals. So I would say more and more companies we're hearing about in Iowa are looking at, other kinds of things their employees want besides pay.
Very good. Well, in the interest of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and land the plane here. So thank you again, Dr. Cox, for joining us this morning and providing your webinar, your presentation on the workforce skirmishes. I think it's given everybody a lot to think about, and hopefully we can continue to have local conversations about it, both as a community and then through our business retention and expansion efforts with our existing employers in the community. So thank you again, and thank you to our webinar sponsors, Lennox, M. Gervich and Sons, and Pinnacle Bank for sponsoring this morning. Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a great day.